This is Christopher Schmidt. I am reflecting on my experience in rethinking the Capstone experience CTL seminar, which I enjoyed and benefited from immensely. During my time in the Rethinking the Capstone Experience seminar, I worked to develop a new syllabus for a course I'd never taught before, LIB200, Technology in the Humanities. And my particular slant on this course was how digital technologies and the recent revolutions in digital technologies affect the production of culture. So, for example, we looked first at kind of more general social effects that have been remarked on in essays like, is Google making us stupid? But we also looked at historical technological revolutions as discussed in Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, and thought about how earlier technologies like language, writing, the Gutenberg invention of the printing press, the invention of lithographs, of photography, of radio, and then finally of more, television, and then finally, the more recent internet and digital reproduction technologies have affected ethical quandaries about, how we might be confronting artificial intelligences and how our online patterns might, put us into kind of filter bubbles where we're not receiving information from other human beings, but rather from computer algorithms. Also, the ethical implications of this as they enter the legal sphere, particularly how copyright issues may be under pressure from digital changes in the way that information is circulated digitally. And then finally, how that maybe supports and the digital revolution maybe changes the way artworks are reproduced. So that there's more sampling, more remix, more conceptual art, and art that really calls into question, because it is based on computer algorithms and other kind of procedural constraints, calls into question originality as a kind of value in artistic production. Okay. So I thought this was a really good topic. I mean, first of all, because it spoke a little bit to my strengths and my interests and my background as a web designer, and also in my more recent literary critical work, looking at remix and conceptual art and poetry. I thought that because so many students are using this work in the production of their own, kind of knowledge work in their classes and maybe in their jobs, it would be really useful to reflect on their own practices. So that's one way that I used reflection in this course. And I also extended that into having the students write a digital literacy narrative, which they posted on ePortfolio with a picture and went through several drafts in response to student feedback and my own feedback. And then they translated that, because we'd studied a little bit, the differences between like oral, visual, and textual modalities. They then did that translation themselves and reflected, on one hand, on the intellectual process, how that affected their content to have it translated in these different modalities. And then finally on what it felt like in a more personal way, to compose an essay in text and then to compose an essay in an audio form, and many of them found that the audio essay was more difficult and forced them really to kind of practice and refine their writing. Okay. A lot of the students were thinking about in terms of reflection, moving into transition. A lot of the students were thinking about what skills they could take to the next segment of their life. A lot of the students were moving on. So this one student, Fahima Patwari, she wrote about her study habits, how she really learned how to overcome her kind of poor study habits that she picked up in high school and had dropped out of Stony Brook and ended up at LaGuardia. And now this class was really an opportunity for her to practice better study habits that she would take to Queens College, where she would be attending in the fall. Another student was going on to John Jay College. So I had a number of students who were kind of moving on to four-year schools. Another student, Adrian, Alicia, was his transition was not so much in terms of going on to a four-year school yet, but he was thinking about integrating his experiences in other classes because he is interested in engineering and computer science, and so the examinations we did of robots and artificial intelligence was really useful for him because it allowed him to reflect on what he would do with his education at LaGuardia, how he would use that in the public sphere, in a job, in a workplace. I used the ePortfolio in the Capstone course largely as a staging ground for other digital projects. So we had the digital narrative, we had the digital literacy narrative, the audio essay. I also had the students do a term paper that they posted on ePortfolio, and finally I had them do a digital story version of that term paper. So they really became fluent in a lot of different modes, and that ePortfolio was really a place where they could connect it to work in other classes. It was a place where they could showcase that work and kind of practice using digital tools. I thought all the digital lessons were really effective. I thought Pablo Avila, who is my studio assistant, did a great job. I would measure the success in really kind of like this, in the student reflections where they really reflected on, what they learned and how well they valued their process. I also felt this is moving away from the kind of the studio hour and the digital technologies, but in the research essay, the way I scaffolded it and the way I did like, a thesis slam and had them stage the assignment doing outlines and research and putting that all together really worked to really produce strong papers. I mean, the papers were just simply stronger than what I'd received in classes when I had done less staging. Where I struggled was, I would say I would do fewer things in the next iteration of this course. I simply attempted too much and I didn't have enough time to really have the students work on other parts of their ePortfolio. Um, but I would say that worked out okay because the students came into the class with such different levels of completion of their ePortfolios that it would have made it kind of difficult for me to really this was one kind of stumbling block I had with Pablo was we just couldn't figure out a way to measure and grade differently students' works on the other section. So if like someone already had an about me section versus someone who didn't have it, how could I grade those differently considering one was simply revising what he had, whereas the other one was maybe, the other student was maybe doing something from scratch. And so that was just a problem and a place where I struggled. And so that inclines me in some ways not to use the ePortfolio in LIB200. I might be more inclined to use it in like an introductory course, so like basic writing or English 101. Overall, I think the way it most impacted me was the designing of the rubric. I thought, even though I use checklists and rubrics quite frequently, it was just interesting to compare with other people how they use their rubrics, and to collaborate on that was a valuable process. So I appreciate all the input from the seminar leaders and from my fellow colleagues.